Hi, this is Christina Caudill with Radiant Astrology. And today I'm really honored to be here speaking in the EA Zoom meetings on Jupiter and Scorpio. And today I've titled my talk Sublime Possession. As we know, Scorpio deals a lot with things like obsession and compulsion and even addiction. And we can often feel possessed by the energy because Scorpio deals with a lot of shadow material and subconscious material. And so I'm really excited to get into this, which I can imagine there's many Scorpio fascinated people fascinated by Scorpio on the call today. So I'll go ahead and get started. I love this quote by Carl Jung where he says, every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or morphine or idealism. And so, I mean, you can say, many things about whether this is Neptunian or Scorpionic or Martian, but this really spoke to me because we see Jupiter often associated with idealism, with believing that we are great or maybe even greater than perhaps we are, because Jupiter can expand and have so much hope and abundance. But at the end of the day, we have to realize that Scorpio is within the bounds of Saturn. And so, maybe the word addictions being bad, maybe that can be a narrow view of the Scorpionic energy. But what we want to realize is Jupiter can make us feel like anything's possible. And sometimes that is a good thing, and sometimes we need to check that a little bit. And when we go into Scorpio territory, bringing consciousness to the unconscious area is going to be especially significant and important for us to sort of navigate this transit of Jupiter and Scorpio from a personal level. So Jupiter is transiting Scorpio. It ingresses October 11th, which is coming up pretty quickly on us, through November 8th, 2018. And as we know, Jupiter is expansive. It signifies growth and often fortune. And it also aligns with our consensus reality, that which we believe to be true from an archetypal level in the collective. And I'll speak a little bit more about that. It's also about what we believe to be true in our faith, and so when we have things like changes of faith or a loss of faith or renewed faith, we think how Jupiter aligns with what we believe to be true from a sense of maybe we've had a learning or some kind of knowledge or insight, and that becomes part of our belief in our faith. And we want to remember that this is within the bounds of Saturn. Jupiter deals with, growth, expansion, and faith in our life, in our daily life, and in our material world. And from an EA standpoint, we look at Scorpio in terms of metamorphosis. Metamorphosis with the intention of evolution. And Jeffrey Wolf Green makes the distinction between Scorpio metamorphosis and Uranian transformation and Neptune transcendence, right? These are all outer planets, and they all involve some type of deep and thorough change. But with Scorpio, we're talking about a metamorphosis where we are changed at a very deep level. Because as we know, Scorpio involves the depth of us, our emotional depth. So when we have a Scorpio type of metamorphosis, it's like a change that is almost so compelling that we have no choice but to let go. And there's that Zen proverb, let go or be dragged, and so you can either, with Scorpio metamorphosis, there often comes a point of letting go, giving oneself up to the greater movement, the greater energy that wants to be birthed forth. And this can even be like you know, when we look at Scorpio Pluto change and surrender, right? Surrender tends to be a theme associated with Scorpio and Pluto, as we use as the modern ruler of Scorpio. And surrender doesn't mean giving up. As a matter of fact, surrender can be a form of empowerment. It can be a form of transcending one's own personal power so that you're metamorphosed into a greater, more empowered state. And so this quote from Mark Jones in The Soul Speaks, he says, the Scorpio archetype corresponds to the purpose of the deeper self as it seeks, impersonally it seems, to move us beyond our pre-existing limitations, to transform us. So it's a movement beyond our pre-existing limitations, transcending our known limitations. Now, what I think is really especially interesting about this quote is he says impersonally. You know, I've heard a lot of people speculate about with Jupiter and Scorpio being a very emotional time. And yes, it can be this, you know, Scorpio, we think of drama and deep emotion, but it can be very different than just sort of like this heated, hot emotion, you know, where you're defending yourself or defending a point of view. The type of Scorpio plutonic emotion, you know, we think of Pluto and the outer planets, again, as transcendent, as impersonal. And so I want to keep that in mind, the impersonality of Scorpio. And that can be where we can see we can get into trouble, right? We can have some issues. I was recently, I was looking at the Oprah magazine where they talked about Jupiter and Scorpio, which I do have an article in. And one of the major events that happened, I think the last time Jupiter was in Scorpio, or it was like in the early 90s, so it might have been the time before then, two cycles ago. Hold on, that's my dog. Was when, what was his name? Michael Jackson was discovered to have had, you know, been a pedophile or what have you. And so that type of impersonal sexuality, impersonal bonding, you know, bonding with another that maybe doesn't even want the sexuality or the bonding. You know, this is the type of thing, the dark side of Scorpio that we can see. And so when we think about Scorpio emotion, a lot of times it's emotion, but it's emotion at a very deep, almost unconscious level. You know, Pluto, as we use as the modern ruler of Scorpio, Pluto is the frozen planet. It is ice cold, right? And it makes me think of that saying by the French that supposedly the French came up with it. It's pretty brilliant. It says, revenge is a dish best served cold, right? And so that usually signifies there had been something that had maybe shattered inside, or something where now the emotion has turned like ice cold. It's like a death in a sense of transformation. And we want to keep that in mind. You know, I think Scorpio has this this real false, I think, this, you know, where people think falsely that it's just this, you know, wild abandon and, you know, heated, you know, craziness and debauchery, which could be true to a certain extent with Jupiter. But when we look at what the purpose is for Scorpio, to be helping us to transcend our limitations, to metamorphose, ultimately, then we'll be using the best of Scorpio when we can keep that in mind and we don't waste this energy. Now, there can be a lot of waste with Jupiter, right? Because Jupiter can be overabundant. So as we move into the Scorpio period, the more consciousness we can bring with our limitations, you know, the more that we can look to find the truly beautiful and the truly transcendent parts of this Scorpio energy that can really make a difference in our personal and collective evolution. And so some more thoughts on Scorpio. Now, the reason I'd like to focus more on the Scorpio archetype, because Jupiter, as we know, it kind of transforms and it expands that which the sign it's in. So as we know, Scorpio is abundance and growth and maybe even overabundance and you know, thinking like so optimistically of the future and things like that, realistically or not. And so in any sign, it's going to see some extremes. And so we want to focus, I think, more on the Scorpio archetype, because what we know of with Jupiter is, again, it will add a sense of extreme to the sign that it's in. So Scorpio has to deal with psychological motivations and intentions. Now, all of this here is from Jeffrey Wolf Green. So those of you that know his work probably recognize this. Our psychological motivations, our intentions. You know, I was looking at quotes to share from Carl Jung, and pretty much everyone I could almost share for Jupiter and Scorpio, right? Because he is sort of our godfather of depth psychology, right? So it's going deep, looking at our underlying motivations and intentions. Scorpio deals with the distortion of repressed material. When material is repressed, then it gets distorted. Jupiter can help to express that material. It might not look so beautiful, right? It might look kind of dark and kind of shameful and kind of the things that we want hidden in that Scorpio closet and locked away. But the truth is the more we repress that which are these deep emotional needs and desires, the more they can be distorted. Scorpio has to deal with bonding and the fear of bonding, which is often betrayal, right? So betrayal is something that is a shadow of Scorpio, and that it pretty much is kind of follows Scorpio like a shadow. You know, so when we think of Jupiter wanting to hope for the best and hope for everything's going to turn out okay, you know, we want to also realize that the shadow of that hope that's not based on anything real or true can be betrayal. Scorpio deals with consequences of choices, as we also know as karma. And Jupiter can feel superhuman in that way, right? Can think, oh, everything's going to turn out okay. Well, you cannot escape Scorpio karma. Not, you know, Jupiter can maybe help things feel a lot more fortunate, but we can also feel a sense of overextension with Jupiter, right? And Scorpio deals with compulsions, obsessions, and addictions. And so with Jupiter, again, it can make anything that Scorpio, any of the Scorpio shadow, go to extremes. And so that's something that as we, again, are moving into the Scorpio time, you know, be thinking about what's the area that I will tend to veer into of my compulsions, obsessions, and addictions. And that is really something that I would say we want to take, you know, fairly seriously during this time. Because again, you know, sometimes once we veer into those obsessions, addictions, they can be very hard to get back on track. Scorpio signifies our deepest security needs at an emotional level, which are often subconscious. So subconscious needs, again, we might not recognize them. Now, what's beautiful about evolutionary astrology or other depth forms of astrology is oftentimes if you recognize your deep security needs from your Scorpio signatures or other signatures in your chart or Pluto signatures, then that you can sort of have a deep resonance to recognize that. But working on them consciously, you know, that takes work. That's where things like depth psychology comes in. And we also want to recognize the Taurus polarity of Scorpio, which often has to do with survival anxiety. right? So, I mean, I can speak to this personally because I have South Node in Taurus and North Node in Scorpio. And so the South Node in Taurus, you know, wants to limit oneself because they're afraid of, literally afraid for their survival. You know, it's like keeping what I have, not making any moves, you know, not trying to expand or grow because I don't want to risk losing what I have. But then Scorpio is saying it's time to push forward. It's time to go bigger. It's time to take the risk. You know, with Jupiter and Scorpio both have to do with risk, right? So it's being risky, taking a gamble. And, you know, we might not know what a good gamble looks like, right? But this is where the intention of Scorpio, in order to take us to the next level of our evolution, that's where this can really be very, very valuable. And so we want to just look at this extreme of the Scorpio risking it all versus the Taurus really being afraid, wanting to be safe, afraid for one's survival, which can keep one stuck in an area of stuckness. And so when we speak of sublime possession, we can be absolutely possessed and obsessed by some of our Scorpio needs and desires. A balanced polarity would be to get grounded in Taurus Earth, coming back to reality, back to you know, the physical world, back to your daily needs, your survival needs, but not getting stuck there. You know, also realizing that there is a greater metamorphosis that's an invitation right now with Jupiter entering Scorpio. And I wanted to do a case study with an artist. I wrote a little bit about this in the OPA magazine article on Jupiter and Scorpio that just came out. And I don't know if many of you probably won't recognize this gentleman's name, but it's Robert Mapplethorpe, who is was an artist. He sadly passed away during the AIDS crisis in the 80s. And many might recognize him. He was the partner of Patti Smith, you know, the rocker Patti Smith. And when they were young, they had this beautiful love affair, which she wrote about in her book, Just Kids. And in the OPA article, I did a little review of both of their charts. But I really wanted to focus on Robert Mapplethorpe because to me, this looks like he's really an embodiment of this Jupiter and Scorpio archetype. We can see he has Jupiter conjunct the Sun in Scorpio in the first house. He also has Mars, the dual ruler of the traditional ruler of Scorpio, in the first house. So you can only imagine the desire for sex, physical contact, things like that. And interestingly, he also has Pluto conjunct Saturn, both conjunct the midheaven, which we'll talk a little bit about. But he essentially, his artwork was considered obscene. When he became more successful and it became known in the public sphere. He did a lot of nudes, male nudes in the beginning, and then some homoerotic photography. And then he ended up delving into the BDSM scene in 1970s New York. And some of those images were, yes, quite challenging, difficult, you know, very, very sexually charged images that were, again, when we think of the impersonal side of Scorpio sex, it's very much that, this sort of cold, but yet powerful, but yet overpowering, like type of imagery. And this is what he was known for. And eventually his work was, and this was shortly after his death, unfortunately he died of AIDS, as I said, just when his artwork was becoming known in he had some retrospectives that were touring the United States, And it touched off a huge firestorm in the culture wars. So the work that he made throughout his lifetime, because these were his retrospectives of his work, they were considered obscene, and they caused there were some lawsuits around the First Amendment rights of museums. And in those cases, and that was in the late 80s, I think 88, and that was about when the arts ended up winning over that. But if we see like an individual and how he moves through life, you know, sex was a huge part of his life. However, in the beginning, he was very, very shy about it, his sexuality, about him being gay. And so, here's a quote from him. "When I have sex with someone, I forget who I am. For a minute, I even forget I'm human. It's the same thing when I'm behind the camera. I forget I exist." So there's something about Scorpio that is about a deep bonding, again, a metamorphosis where I am no longer me. I am no longer my ego. You know, we think of Scorpio as being about, or the eighth house, especially about like sex, death, and other people's money. And that's, you know, we see those themes. But there's also a deep bonding with something like art or music or literature or something that can transform us at that level, something that defines who we are, that can completely change our soul or spirit. And, you know, you also see that actually in Patti Smith's chart, because she also had Jupiter and Scorpio, but she was transformed less publicly anyway by sex, but more by poetry. But with Robert Mapplethorpe, we see this, you know, very intense signature around sex. And it's about this, you know, deep level of forgetting who he was, you know, forgetting he's human, for crying out loud, like who, you know, maybe not even have, when you forget you're human, you know, it could potentially mean, you know, he no longer has those human emotions of love or tenderness during sex. It's simply about being totally possessed, or maybe even possessing another. And the same thing behind the camera. Behind the camera, actually, you know, because he was a photographer, you know, it said that he, you know, he had sex with a lot of his subjects. So, and because he just got so incredibly engrossed in the art, you know. So we want to consider what engrosses us. You know, it doesn't just have to be about you know, another bonding with someone else's money, or with them sexually, or with orgasm, or whatever. It can be about art, or whatever it is that then changes us at a deep level where we forget we exist. And here's a image of the young Robert Mapplethorpe with the young Patti Smith when they were both in New York trying to be artists. And she'd said of him that, you know, she didn't like that he was hanging around, you know, Andy Warhol and all of these, you know, wannabes and all of this money, all of this big money people, where she was really trying to be the artist and just hone her craft and, you know, play in those, you know, dark, smoke-filled rooms or whatever, just get any kind of gig she could, because she really was serious about being a real artist. Whereas Robert Mapplethorpe, even though he certainly worked on his art and was obsessed by it, he was also taken by the glamour of, you know, the New York scene, the art scene, the nightclub scene, that type of thing. And as he was exploring, he started to explore or experiment with men, like his sexuality with men. And he kept it secret from Patti. You know, they lived together and they were lovers and they were a couple. And even though she slowly started to suspect, he kept it secret from her, I think, for years. And he just couldn't bring himself to tell her when he finally realized he was gay, that he was gay. I mean, he was even being paid. He was taking money from men to be like, you know, whatever. He was their little gigolo or whatever you want to call it. And it turned out that I think he waited until a friend of theirs revealed his sexuality to Patty on a dance floor. And he sobbed because he was so ashamed of it. Now we can say that maybe that was the time, you know, now we're so free with homosexuality. It's, we don't think of it as that big a deal. And that was a different time. But, you know, when we look at this signature of Scorpio sexuality can go deep. But as we know, it's something, Scorpio issues usually we don't want revealed, even if we might even be able to admit certain things to ourselves about sexuality or these other, you know, darker hidden issues. They can be more challenging when, you know, for someone with a Scorpio signature to want to reveal them. I mean, that's why a lot of times they say Scorpios make great psychologists, but they will not reveal anything about themselves. Because again, there's that whole betrayal, fear that if I were to be seen in my wholeness and all of my shame and my darkness, that, you know, I will be unlovable or I will be abandoned. And they, you know, from the story anyway, from Just Kids, which is a beautiful memoir, but it might be tinged in a little bit of rose-tinted glasses because it's just a very sweet story. You know, they eventually went their own way. And let's see. So Robert, here's some of his images. I won't spend too long on this. And you can see these are racy. And this isn't anywhere near some of the more racy things I even saw online. So lots of BDSM, lots of leather, lots of, you know, there were lots of naked bodies and things like that. Very powerful, very, you know, there's this whole empowering and disempowering theme here with this whole sexuality thing. Oh, and I had another quote from him. To make pictures big is to make them more powerful, which I thought was interesting from just a Jupiter and Scorpio standpoint, right? Because things are big, we think are more powerful. You know, big is power. And so apparently that's what, that was part of his MO when it came to art. Now, what's interesting is this is his partner. He eventually had Sam Wagstaff, who he met in the 70s and who was his partner the rest of his life, even though Robert had many other lovers. And I'm not sure if Sam did as well. But what was interesting is, so Sam Wagstaff was already a successful art curator and collector, very wealthy. And they met just around the time of Robert Mapplethorpe's Jupiter return, right? And so as we think of Jupiter being fortunate connections, Jupiter also being about, you know, big sums of money, winning big, and in Scorpio, other people's money, other people's resources that we can have access to. And so they met in the 70s and were together all the way through Robert's death in the late 80s. I think they met in 1972 and were together till his death in 88. And he essentially made Robert a star. I mean, I don't know if many of you might already know, I'm a recovering art dealer. I had an art gallery for 13 years, and I know how very difficult it is for an artist to break through and to be successful and to be known. And yeah, it can take a lot of money, financial backing. And so who's to say if he never met Sam Wagstaff, would he have ever been the successful, renowned artist? But maybe, again, he was fated that Jupiter and Scorpio was really working for him. And then we see, again, the polarity of Scorpio polarity with Taurus, that survival need, that deep survival need on a practical level, on a survival needs level, and that Scorpio being about a deep bonding. Mapplethorpe was, again, he was pretty open about his many lovers that he met. I guess the more of a celebrity he became, the more he had lovers and would photograph them and things like that. But he always had the backing and support of Sam. And so when we look at Jupiter being about our consensus beliefs, right? Sorry, there goes my dog again. Quiet! About, sorry, I don't know if you heard that. Jupiter being about our consensus beliefs. Jupiter in Scorpio will show us a metamorphosis of our consensus morality. What is moral to us all? Now, we've been having of course, our whole world is changing for many reasons, especially here in the US. Every day seems different, right? But Jupiter and Scorpio will really test this, will really push this in many areas. Obviously, sexuality, we can expect some definite paradigm shifts around that. There almost always is when Jupiter is transiting Scorpio. But here on the left is an image of when the artworks by Robert Mapplethorpe were being, there was that big controversy, the culture wars about were his works too obscene to be shown in public museums, because public museums use public art, right? And I love this this quote here that says, "If you give artists freedom of expression, soon every American will want it." And here on the right, this is what's happening right now. This is going on currently. The Guggenheim Museum in New York had an exhibition from some Chinese artists that involved animals. And they had these dogs fighting each other, and that was the exhibition. And I know almost everyone I know in the art world, still few people I still know are up in arms about this. It's animal cruelty. But, you always have those, there's still a faction of people saying freedom of speech, freedom of creative expression. So this is causing huge controversy. Now, from what I know from this exhibition, the dogs they're not able to actually touch each other, but they are encouraged to get angry with each other and bark at each other. And they're on, you can see these treadmills. It is just not something that, many people think is at all kind or healthy or whatever for those animals. So, and I would even say Jupiter is close enough, where it's at the very end of Libra, Libra being about justice and balance, but we're getting close to Jupiter and Scorpio. So we want to keep an eye out for, what is moral? What is morality to us? What is it on a personal level? And what is it on a collective level? Again, if we see Scorpio as having a shadow of impersonality, when we're impersonal, then we can not see others as human, or not see other creatures as being sentient beings that deserve to be valued. So it's always coming back to, valuing oneself and valuing other human beings. We want to sort of keep that in mind as we get this expansive Scorpio energy. And so getting back to Saturn. So as I mentioned before, Jupiter was within Saturn, right? Is within the belt of Saturn. And so it tends to have to play within Saturn's rules, no matter what sign it's in or what have you. But right now, Saturn is in Sagittarius, right? And so, which is a sign ruled by Jupiter. So Saturn, you know, zodiacally, right, is being ruled by Jupiter right now. So maybe they're kind of playing nice. So Saturn, although, you know, we've seen Saturn and Sagittarius bring up a lot around, you know, a lot of the dark side of Sagittarius, the karma of Sagittarius around, you know, our race relations or how we feel about foreigners and immigrants. You know, we've had to declare what we really believe in those areas. So until December 21, Saturn then ingresses its own sign of Capricorn until 2020. I mean, I think 2019, it goes into Sagittarius, and then it retrogrades back into Capricorn, where then it finally leaves Capricorn in December 2020. So Saturn will then be in its own sign. It's not going to have to play by Sagittarius's rules. I mean, by Jupiter's rules. And Saturn will be then ruling Pluto, which is the ruler of Scorpio, and transiting Jupiter. So basically, in December, when Saturn ingresses Capricorn, you know, it's going to be ruling that transiting Jupiter, and it's going to be in its own sign. So will that mean that Jupiter will then be, you know, somewhat more limited in all the benefits it can provide us? Will that mean that we have to find ways of honing in or harnessing in that Jupiter energy so that it makes sense more on a disciplined level, on a karmic level? Because both Saturn and Scorpio have a lot to do with karma, you know, that can be instant karma, whereas Jupiter might think it can play by its own rules. You know, we want to be very conscious of the karma of what we may be facing when, you know, we have this overabundance of optimism in the sign of Scorpio. And of course, this is probably the ultimate Scorpionic quote from Carl Jung: "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Right? I think we all know this one by heart probably by now, those of us that are EA astrologers. And so I like to think of it as, if we are on the river Styx right now, if we are about to enter this underworld territory, we're about to veer into Scorpio with Jupiter telling us everything will be okay, everything will be great, everything will work out fine. I mean, it could do. I mean, you look at Robert Mapplethorpe's story, although the part I didn't get into with Robert Mapplethorpe is, again, sadly, he was a victim of the AIDS crisis. When, you know, that was a total paradigm shift when it came to sex and sexuality. And you know, was that karma, or was that the fact that Scorpio deals with things like viruses and bacteria? And Jupiter, again, can expand things. So as we veer into the Scorpio territory, we want to ask ourselves, what is the darkness within us that we want to make conscious? You know, it can take things like shamanic healing, depth psychology, having a good therapist on call, I would say, to be able to bounce ideas off of, to be able to reflect our lives with. Because again, what might seem joyous and fun to us in the dark that we're not taking responsibility for, there's always going to be some karmic consequences when we are dealing with Scorpio type of energy. So hopefully I made a good time, and I thank you. My website is radiantastrology.com, and if you'll keep an eye out for that OPA Jupiter in Scorpio edition coming out here on October 1st, you can check out my article on Sublime Possession. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Christina. Would you like to take a few questions?
If there are questions, sure.
If there are, okay. Could you please click on stop share at the top?
Sure.
Right.
Stop share. Ooh, I don't see it.
At the very top, it's the red section.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah. Great. So any questions?
I have one.
Go ahead.
Okay, hi, it's Lauren. Yeah, it sounds amazing, but you know, the other thing, the other light side of Scorpio is that, do you imagine there could be some good points about it, like the occult and transcendence and transformation? I mean, there's got to be something good coming from this. I mean, I'm a Scorpio, so I'm like, I want to hear something good.
Oh, okay, Lauren. I'm sorry if you thought it was all dark. I mean, I talked a lot about metamorphosis in the beginning. Did you catch the beginning?
You know, you're imagining I think it was all dark. I don't think it was all dark. I thought it was very good. I just was wondering what the other, I mean, we don't have that much time to go into everything. So I thought it was an amazing presentation. So, but I just wanted to know what you thought about the, you know.
Well, you know, it's, if you can just think about the butterfly, you know, in the chrysalis, right? And so metamorphosis is metamorphosizing at the deepest level. And so when we can look at ourselves at like, what is it that really makes us want to go all in, right? With Jupiter, it'll be going all in. And as I said before in the beginning, I'm sorry if I didn't make this too clear, but that it doesn't have to just be about sex or, you know, or survival anxiety. Sometimes we can go all in with, you know, astrology or something, or art or music or something that really completely just takes us over and wants us to become better or to become different or to become more. But I do, because I have a lot of Scorpio too. I mean, there's part of me that is, you know, this is the thing. I was just talking to a friend of mine, another astrologer recently, that Scorpio energy, when I talk to Scorpios, people with Scorpio signatures, I think it's great that they have a healthy fear of Scorpio, you know, because some people say, and the friend I was talking to, Richard, he's not here today, but he's a psychotherapist, and he says, I hate it when people think, oh, Pluto, Scorpio, it's great, I can't wait to get into it, you know, because the nature of it is that it is about deep change. And what I often see with Scorpio people is they're like, oh, I don't want to go there because I know if I go, I'm going all in, you know, and I'm maybe even to the point where I see a new side of myself that I didn't know exist. And sometimes that can be scary because we don't know what is on the other side. You know, we can't see what change really looks like, the end results or the end game. But, you know, I think it can be really exciting. This is probably my Saturn talking, right? Because it can be really exciting. It can change our lives for the better, because ultimately Jupiter is a benefic, you know, if you look at it from that standpoint. But it can also be too much. You know, as we've seen with Jupiter and Libra, you know, Jupiter is about partnerships and justice and relating and harmony, but it can also be, you know, it can be like way too much on both sides. So things haven't been all sunny and rosy because of Jupiter and Libra, right? Like partnerships and relationships have sometimes, you know, been totally imbalanced.
Yes.
So, you know, I think ultimately it's realizing there's a potential for imbalance. So if we want to find balance, you know, with anything with Jupiter, so as we're heading into this underworld, which, you know, as EA astrologers, I think we're comfortable with that idea. We want to have consciousness with it. But, you know, I think astrology is a very scorpionic endeavor, as is, you know, magic and things like that. There's some really exciting things that Scorpio can bring us. So what are your ideas with a positive side of Jupiter and Scorpio?
Oh, well, God, I guess it just depends on what you're doing. But yeah, no, I think, you know, well, I guess I'll have to find out. I mean, you know, I have mine in the 8th house. So I just think that means a lot more change and a lot more, you know, falling from the ashes back to the phoenix again. Like I've done it before, I'll do it again, I guess. If I'm around, if I'm here to do it. But it could also, I really like not to be too idealistic about things, or to have, limits, to have some kind of, like, not just to go overboard, because Scorpio is very intense, and so is Jupiter, right? They can really be like, whoa, like go right off the deep end. So it's good that you pointed out a lot of the, and I just think there is a lot of, stuff coming up from the swamp, and the conscious everywhere, and it's going to keep happening more and more. And who knows if what humanity is going to be able to do with it.
Yeah. Well, especially, as of today, Pluto was stationing direct, right? And Pluto was on its own south node. So, I didn't want to bring up Hugh Hefner, but we can see, Hugh Hefner just passed away, right? And so that is a very much, and in Capricorn, he was part of the patriarchy, even though they say, oh, he helped with sexual liberation and all that. Well, yeah, maybe in the 50s, but then after that, he became part of the patriarchy, maybe a different patriarchy.
Exploitation too. It wasn't just
liberation. Thank you. Yes. So it's, so right now we're probably feeling this discomfort with this. I know I certainly, that's why I'm probably saying, let's be careful with Jupiter and Scorpio.
Yeah.
But so we're feeling this stirring, this stirring at a depth level. Anyone that's either being aspected by this Pluto station, or has planets ruled by Scorpio.
Yeah, because maybe there could be some big wars about religion, and people coming in that people that are scary, that they don't look like you do, like how Scorpio can be. What is that called? Too suspicious. They're kind of like, Scorpio can be too protective sometimes. So.
Yeah, and as we see this, the Scorpio sort of shadow and things like that. Whenever Pluto is changing direction, or I usually am on the lookout for something being unearthed, something that was buried being unearthed. And that's everything literally from, they just found like the Temple of Artemis in Greece, like yesterday or so. I just saw the news thing today, so it can be beautiful things like that, being buried unearthed. And then there's other things that is like, you're looking at the maggots and the, the dirt. And so we just kind of have to, and I think this is good, that if it scares us, then this is a time to be like, do I have a therapist or someone I can go to? Because I may need some support just to bring me back to my center. Right?
Yes. I think we all.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Lauren. And Christina, I was thinking about Jupiter wanting freedom. It's a freedom archetype, wanting freedom to explore. And it seems to be this exploration can be anywhere, like, outer and inner. But Scorpio is very much inner exploration. And how kind of similar they are, but sort of different, because Jupiter wants the freedom and Scorpio wants that fixed attachment and possession and addiction. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, and so it can, again, Jupiter can expand that which is the art. I often see Jupiter being sort of the support to the sign that it's in. I don't think Jupiter isn't going to like overwhelm Scorpio, but it can be having a lot of something, a lot of whether it be wanting so much of that scorpionic bonding, it's never enough. Whatever you have is never enough. I want more, and I want more, and I want more. And I want to feel more empowered by being bonded with another. And so, that can be ecstasy, or it can be totally the other side, the other shadow of being, feeling betrayed, feeling abandoned, because again, Jupiter can expands the Scorpio needs. And Scorpio can, just as much as Scorpio needs to be bonded, there's also a deep need to be abandoned. If you think about the metamorphosis intention,
Yeah.
you know, like we don't give ourselves all in unless there's that possibility that the more we give, the more we grasp, the more we're going to repel.
That's
You know?
fascinating. It's so interesting that the soul, the impersonal soul, knows what it needs, and perhaps it needs freedom for the next year.
And this can be, and
Yeah.
you know, it's interesting because when we see how integrated, you know, because what happens is this will show us how integrated we really are, you know, when we're imbalanced by the Jupiter, you know, how integrated is our Scorpio within us. I think it's a chance for finding that integration and finding a rebalancing when, you know, it can look like we have these great doors opening, these great, you know, great luck falling from the sky. You know, that's what Jupiter is known for, you know, like Robert Mapplethorpe and his guardian angel, basically. But then we also can see, again, the opposite of that. So, you know, with Jupiter, we want to be aware of extremes, you know, on both sides. Well, thank you. If there's any other, if there's any other questions,
I
I'll
had a
take them.
question.
Oh, hi, Michelle or Wanda. Hi.
What do you think about, my thought was when Saturn was in this space, was in Scorpio. I'm wondering now that Jupiter is coming behind that, will it be a bringing out of any truths and things that were suppressed when Saturn was in Scorpio?
Oh, yeah, that's really good. Because Jupiter is the truth seeking, right? And so when we think about, I know that when we had Saturn over in Scorpio, I mean, I have a Scorpio stellium, so I'm like the guinea pig for the Scorpio. And so there's a lot of this, that is just like karma, 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 right? And Jupiter, you know, a lot of that can have been traumatic for some people, right? Because that is some, you know, intense karma in the very depths of who we are. And when we think about Saturn being about structure in life, you know, it created a restructuring at that time. And maybe during that time, we didn't have a lot of faith. We could have lost faith in certain areas. And now Jupiter, as you said, can have us finding faith again. It can have us finding belief again in a new way. You know, maybe we could have been traumatized to a point where we had been shut down, because I very do much, you know, see Scorpio being ruled by Pluto. As I said, it can be being shut down and being like ice cold. And now with Jupiter coming back in again, it can maybe lighten that. It can maybe help us to find some faith again, help us to play again. Maybe, you know, again, when it comes to like bonding with, say, for instance, some kind of scorpionic activity like astrology, you know. During that time with Saturn, maybe it was like, I know for me, it was when I finally was like, I'm studying this seriously. I've got to really actually know this stuff. And then now Jupiter can be like, wow, I can actually play. I learned stuff during that time. You know, I took myself and my studies seriously, and now I can actually play with it. Now I can actually sort of, you know, put the paint on the canvas. So yeah, that's really good. I think that if we can look back and see what was the karma back then, what were the hard lessons, hard scorpionic lessons we learned when Saturn was in Scorpio. I think that was 2013, around that time. And then now, where can we find hope again and find faith again? That's a great question. Thank you. Thank you all for these really wonderful questions.
We've got 5 more minutes, so let's keep going.
Oh, we do? I must have ended
yeah.
early. I was thinking about stopping at 6 o'clock. Sorry. I gotten it wrong. But no, fine.
Similarly, we could apply that to Saturn in Sag.
Mm-hmm.
and Jupiter revealing the structures created, right? What structures have we been creating with Saturn in Sag based on our beliefs?
Mm-hmm.
Were these man-made beliefs, or were these beliefs, were these based on natural law?
Right.
So,
And
yeah, go ahead.
what I am thinking of with Saturn in Sagittarius is we've started to form our beliefs, right? So it's been a time of forming the beliefs that, we think, we always assume that, we're feminists, or we assume that we are for equality among races and this and that, whatever. But since Saturn has been in Sagittarius, it's been like, what does that really mean, and what does that really look like? And many people have found that they've had to declare, that they're not a racist, or that they believe in X, Y, and Z. And you see it on Facebook all the time. People are, and then if there's some kind of disaster or something, if you don't speak up about it, someone's going to tell you, hey, why didn't you talk about, Puerto Rico, or like whatever, so there's a lot of that judgment too, right? The judgment around each other and each other's beliefs. And I feel like when Saturn then gets into Capricorn, it'll be really about focusing on putting those beliefs in action. It's like, okay, so you say you're for trans and homosexuality. Like, what are you actually doing about it? Or if these people come into your workplace, are you really going to be equal to that? Or whatever it is going to show up in the real world. It's going to show up in how we conduct ourselves in our business, in our life. So it's going from, anytime we go from Sagittarius, as you said, the natural law, and solidifying that and saying, how does natural law actually fit into how I'm living my life, and forming my belief system, forming my philosophy of life. And then when Saturn then goes into Capricorn, it's going to be kind of the rubber hits the road around that. And
yes, and the scorpionic process of discarding beliefs, elimination, the false beliefs, that is. I think, Lauren, you had something to say?
Yeah, I just have something really quick that I thought about. So Jeffrey Wolf Green, and we have separating desires, and then we have desires, and I'm thinking maybe we could have freedom from desires, like maybe have no desires. I mean, that sounds really weird, but that's where I'm kind of at.
mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
I think totally, yeah. I totally can see that, because again, as you said, the freedom element of Jupiter, looks differently for everybody. So what is freedom to any individual? And I also think that when we talk about desires with Scorpio, again, a lot of them are on the unconscious level. Even if we think we're free from desires, there's something we're replacing it with, probably.
True.
Right? Mm-hmm. So as Linda had said, it could be, casting aside certain desire. Like, there's a lot of people that are like, oh, I'm free from every desire. I'm meditating, 5 hours a day. Well, you might be addicted to meditating, I mean, like, if we ever, when we look at it, we're committed to something at every moment of the day, right? Or we're always committing to something, right? That's something to keep in mind. It's like, and it's also with Jupiter in Scorpio wanting to commit, and us thinking that, oh, I'm not a committing type of person. I don't want to commit to anything. But it's like, okay, well, we're committing to be non-committal, or we're committing to, relaxing versus, going for a run, or we're committing, right? That kind of thing. And I know Jeffrey Wolf Green says that that Scorpio is ultimately about commitment, and the fear of commitment, right? Because as soon as we commit, we have to cast away, as Linda said, other things, everything else, so it almost brings us back into the Taurus polarity, where Taurus is about having blinders on, because I just want to survive. And so neither of those are two extremes, so where can we, as I said, have the faith in our own survival, but yet also expand, explore, and change and transform? And we could get, and it can feel free when we have Jupiter helping us out with that.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Christina. I love your answers. I love the depth of your knowledge.
Thank you.
So let's take one final question or comment. Okay, looks like that's it. Thank you so much, Christina. That was absolutely amazing. Absolutely.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry about my dog barking.
That's okay.
She doesn't usually do that. She just
Natural
decided
law.
to do it tonight for some reason. She wanted to be heard.
Natural law.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
so
This was such a pleasure for me.
And thank you from all of us. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christina.
Thanks so much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Totally enjoyed it.
Bye. Thanks.